Okay, it's 12:30. I'd like to call this meeting of the Corporate Services Committee to order. Great to see all the members of the committee here and a couple of guests. Thanks for joining us. I'll just look to see if there are any disclosures of pecuniary interest. Okay, seeing none, let's move on to the consent items. There are 8 of them. Would anyone like to pull any of those items?
5, please.
I wasn't sure if that was just putting your hand up or if it was a 5. Thank you. Yeah. So the update on Bud Gardens. Any of the other items, colleagues?
8, please.
Okay, let's have 2.1 through 2.4.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have some questions on most of the proposed budgets for the BIAs. Just don't know if you want me to go through them while we're going through the slate of all of them together or individually.
If you have questions that you don't expect might change how you're going to vote on them, then maybe we do them all together. I don't mind having the questions, but if you think they might influence your support for the recommendations, then maybe we should do them individually. I'll leave it up to you.
Through you, if I could do the first 3 separately then? 2.1, 2.2, and 2.3.
Okay, so that leaves 2.6 and 2.7 that we could do together. Thanks very much for dealing with everything separately. It's great. Can I have a mover and a seconder for, is it 2.4, 2.6, and 2.7? Okay, Deputy Mayor Hubert, Councillor Morgan. Okay, any discussion on those items? Okay, on 2.4, I'm certainly happy to see that they're approving the BIA budget for the Hyde Park BIA. That's an exciting step forward for them. And we're voting.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Brings us to 2.1, the London Downtown Business Association budget for 2018. Councillor Zafman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have 2 questions regarding 2.1. Specifically, obviously, there was a bit of changes in how the BIA is looking with funding in Main Street this year around. Specifically, though, I had some questions regarding the clean team. That's going to be a bit of a significant increase in the budget there. And then I had some questions regarding under Main Street London expenditure details, 212,000 increase for recruitment. I was just wondering if someone could speak to the details of those 2 items, please.
Anyone want to tackle that one? I see Councillor Park. Go ahead, Councillor Park.
Oh, there we go.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As we know, I'm council's appointee on the BIA, and the BIA itself will be dealing with tenant recruitment as part of the Live, Work, Learn, Play project. There will be significant energy put into that, making sure we've got the right tenants in the right places. In terms of the green team, we all know that over the next year, there's going to be a lot of visitors coming to the downtown area, and having the people on the ground to make sure that the downtown is clean and inviting is quite important. To fill in any gaps, I noticed that Ms. McDonald is here, if the councillor would like to hear from her.
Through the chair, I appreciate the councillor's answers. That's quite helpful. I just wanted to clear that up, just because there wasn't exact details in there about what the purpose of those things were for. So thank you for that. I am good.
Okay, do I have a mover and a seconder for that? Councillor Zafman, seconded by Councillor Morgan. Okay, let's open the vote on that.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Brings us to item 2.2, the Old East Village Business Association proposed budget and special levy. Councillor Zafman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, just one question, and frankly, I guess this is an issue that most of our BAs and lots of organizations in the city will be dealing with, but salary and benefits are obviously being impacted by, I imagine, some changes with minimum wage and some other pieces. But just in terms of the salary and benefits here, seeing a slight reduction in that, just looking for some clarification.
I know that Ms. Pistorius is here if you'd like to hear directly from her. Perhaps you could come down to the mic.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for the question. We had a full-time position that was reduced to a part-time position.
Any other discussion, colleagues? If not, perhaps I can have a mover, a seconder. Councillor Zafman, Deputy Mayor Hubert, thank you. Let's get the vote open.
Councillor Hubert and Mayor Brown. Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Brings us to item 2.3, budget for the Argyle Business Improvement Association. Councillor Zafman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a few more questions on this one. Specifically, the first one is that a note here that some of the increases in costs were partially offset for this by a decreased expenditure HST due to the Argyle attaining the CRA designation of a municipality. Maybe that's something that's normal, but that would be my first question if someone could answer that, and then I have a few more.
Sounds like a good question for finance. Go ahead. Or the Argyle BA, if they'd like to address it directly, go ahead.
Hi there, Heidi Curry, the manager for the Argyle BIA. Yeah, we just got municipality designation, so it just shows in the HST that that there's a reduction in that because we'll be getting more of the HST back.
Through the chair, it's just, is this something that's common amongst our BIAs? Maybe I'm just not familiar, but I was just curious if that's something that they can all apply for, or if, just some clarity.
Yes, it is. Should I stay here, just in case? 'Cause
Through the chair, thank you for that, and I appreciate if you could say just a few more questions. So a couple of the, I guess, significant changes to the budget. One was the office rent seems to be that it's going to approximately double in the year ahead. And then there was some costs, my understanding, that renovations that were paid for by the maybe owner of the building, but that there was a request or furniture that was added. And then another piece was that there was cited that the AGM costs will be significantly higher this year because it's an election year. I was wondering if you could just give some details around that.
So as far as the office rent is concerned, we are actually taking over the office next door to us, and it's going to be a boardroom so that we can actually lend that out to our members. We have a lot of small businesses that don't have somewhere to have meetings and workshops, et cetera. So yes, now we're doubling our space, so the rent is doubled, but the landlord has graciously said that he's going to pay for the majority of the renovations so that we could put some more money towards new furniture, as the furniture we have was basically lent to us when somebody was going out of business. So that's that. Sorry, the other question?
Through the chair, not a problem, sorry. I know there was a few there. You mentioned that there was going to be some increased costs. I'm not sure where it's covered under exactly, but for the,
for the
AGM as a result of an election year.
Yeah, so we just do a more extensive campaign for our board of directors for the election year. So it's our board, so more newsletters, more information going out to the property owners, et cetera.
Any other discussion on this one? If not, let's have a mover and a seconder. Councillor Van Holst, seconded by Councillor Zafman. Thank you.
Motion carries 6-0.
Okay, that's all the BIA budgets approved. Thanks very much for being here and for the great work you're doing in the community. Brings us to 2.5, the 2017 annual update on Budweiser Gardens. I believe this was pulled by Councillor Morgan. Go ahead.
Yes, so first off, let me congratulate Budweiser Gardens on another successful year. It looks like it continues to be a popular destination for all types of entertainment venues, and the budget plan, whatever we want to call this, looks very, very healthy and sustainable. Now, that being said, I did notice a couple of items that I wanted to ask some questions on. The one is on the change in indirect expenses, and I'm not talking about the change year over year, but in the actual financial performance report, the difference between the budgeted plan and the actual, which seems to be a majority of the difference that have impacted the amount flowing to the city. I mean, you obviously add all this up together, but is there a reason why there was such a variance versus the budget in indirect expenses? And for those following along, it's about halfway through the actual report, page 22 in the report prepared by Spectra and Budweiser Gardens.
Through the chair to the committee, there were some investments that the Budweiser Gardens undertook in 2017, most notably the metal detectors that came into play midway through.
Okay, and so that was a majority of that variance versus budget, and it was unexpected at the time of the budget preparation?
Yes.
So I guess what we don't anticipate is that being, since that's basically a one-time capital cost, that being something that would drive a variance in the future, and we could expect to return to, a more normal level, assuming all the operations are relatively standard year over year. the proceeds to the city is obviously the part I care about the most, because that's the part that comes to the city. Obviously, I want it to be a successful institution, but that being about, half of what it was. And certainly, I would challenge that there have been variances, and would say have been variances on the upside. 2014 is a good example of it flowing in, so I recognize these ebb and flow year over year. I just wanted to understand the difference and whether it was a one-time or ongoing difference to the revenues that we can expect from the city's sale point.
Councillor Zafman, just look to see if there's any other questions or comments on this one. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through your question to staff, one number which sort of stands out for me is from the financial highlights, the 5-year snapshot. At the end of 2017, approximately $9 million remaining on the outstanding debt, with the final payment forecast to be made in 2023. I just want to make sure that that is fine and we are proceeding properly and we're on course to have that paid off in 2023.
Yep, that's still baked into our long-term forecast on the operating budget, paying it back.
For a mover and a seconder on this one. Councillor Zafman and Councillor Morgan, thank you. Any further discussion? Okay, let's open the vote.
Motion carries 6-0.
We dealt with 2.6 and 2.7, brings us to 2.8, declaring for surplus and sale 1694 Evangeline Street and 126 Hamilton Road. Please, pulled by Councillor Van Holst. Go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I pulled this one to just discuss the 126 Hamilton Road, which is a property I've had my eye on for a while. Because I'm not averse to us selling the property. However, it has seemed like that might be an opportunity. There was talk, and it's actually written in our community improvement plan, the possibility of a repair cafe. So a place where people could go that's got some tools and fix things. And it's a need from our community. We have quite a few people who are underemployed but have substantial skill sets. So it was recognized that the potential for a place like this is that those people could go and work to improve the property, which is in quite a bit of disrepair, and sharpen their skill sets, and perhaps bring it to a place where the city could make some more money off the sale, or use that on an ongoing basis as something like this. Now, I know that the people who are interested in that have partnered up with the woodworking shop down on.
Time out. So I didn't know that the councillor was going there.
Okay, sir.
So I'll have to declare a pecuniary interest on that. So I'll just step away on that.
Can you just use your mic so that it's on the record? Thanks.
Sorry. Since the councillor has mentioned the London Community Wood Shop, of which I am the, president of, I'll have to declare an interest on this matter. Thank you.
Continue, Councillor
Okay.
Reynolds.
Well, thank you very much. And sorry, I mentioned that I didn't want to evoke a conflict of interest or a pecuniary interest, but rather give some credit for that project as well. So those are my comments. I'm not sure if I want to move forward with something on this specifically. I might bring something to council, but those are my concerns. It seems like this might be an opportunity for our community, and so I may talk about that more later. At this point, I'm happy to move this declaration of surplus and sale right now.
Okay, is there a seconder for that? Councillor Zafman? Okay, any other discussion? Okay,
Motion carries 5 with 1 abstain.
Okay, that brings us to our items for direction. We have 2 appointments to advisory committee. Well, one's an advisory committee, the other one is Town and Gown. And the request for designation of the Fork Fest as a municipally significant event. So let's deal with 4.1. There are 3 candidates and 1 position. So I'd like to see if there are nominations. Councillor Zafman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to put forward Sean O'Connell.
Any other nominations?
Dan Foster.
And anyone want to nominate Elliot Horsfold? Okay, let's do a ballot with just the 2 then. Not to be a giant pain, but I think I'm going to nominate Elliot Horsfold. I was just thinking about it, so let's add him. Okay, colleagues, while Ms. Rowe is doing the tabulations, I think we can move on to 4.2, which is the appointment to fill a vacancy on the Town and Gown Committee. This requires a voting member from Ward 13. We have 1 candidate. Mayor Brown. Any seconders? Okay. Councillor Park.
Thank you. Just before everyone votes, I just wanted to use this opportunity to thank Jean-Marc Metalier, who has been the representative on the Town and Gown committee up until this point. Look forward to working with Zachary.
Closing the vote, and that motion carries 6-0.
Brings us to 4.3, request to designate Fork Fest a municipally significant event. I think we'll just deal with that and then we'll come back to 4.1 if that's fine with everyone. Councillor Zafman, you're moving it. Seconded by Councillor Morgan. Discussion on that? Councillor Reynolds.
Yes, this one, although I'm supportive of our businesses, seems less like the kinds of events we have seen, and because it's on their actual property. And I wanted to ask, just through the chair to staff, is there another way for them to get a liquor license? Can they get something for a property in this way, or is this the only way that can happen? This one just seemed a little too, like, I don't know, too like bonusing to me, or it's something. It seems like it's not somewhere where they've got an event, but it's for a particular business only.
Anyone want to answer that one? What I can tell you is that Fork River Brewing Company understands the liquor license application process, and they're doing what they need to do to get a special occasion permit to use the parking lot. So I don't think there's another option. If there was, they probably would have pursued it. This is quite a process.
Okay. All right, well, thank you very much then.
Councillor Morgan.
Yes, I just want to add that although these things say declare as a municipally significant event, that doesn't mean anything from the municipality standpoint. It is something that is in the liquor licensing code that they call it that to be able to apply for a special occasion permit. We don't have any parameters saying that we apply some sort of special significance to this other than the terminology that's used that we're required to support in order for them to apply for the license. And I think that that is why the process can be an administrative process in the future, and I know that's coming forward at some point.
Any further discussion? Okay, let's open up the vote.
Councillor Hubert. Closing the vote, and that motion carries 6-0.
Okay, let's circle back to 4.1 and see what the results of the ranked ballot were.
You will see from the spreadsheet here that Mr. Foster received the majority, number 1 votes.
Okay. Let's have a motion to appoint Mr. Foster. Is there a mover for that? Councillor Morgan, seconder. Councillor Van Holst.
Mayor Brown. Motion carries 6-0.
Okay, that brings us to deferred matters and additional business. There's 5.1 and 5.2. One that's a letter from Councillor Ridley. Thanks for joining us. And myself and the mayor. The other one, which is a letter from Councillor Park, who's also here. They're basically on the same topic, and I wonder if we can deal with them sort of together and see if there's a combined resolution that's going to come out of committee that would be acceptable. Is people fine with that? Okay. So I think I'll just look to see if there are speakers to the topic. Councillor Park.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I think that that's a wise thing to put these two together. I know I'm not alone in this, that with the thought that in any organization with the tone and culture, it comes from the top, and it comes from the horseshoe, and it comes from management staff. And I think it's important for someone in an elected position to articulate that no one is above the fray when it comes to abuse, that when it comes to calling out abuse, no matter if it's a member of council, a member of management, or a member of frontline staff in our local bargaining units, that individuals who carry out abuse need to be called out and they need to be held accountable. Over the last week, I've received a lot of phone calls. I've had a lot of coffee with people. And some of the stories that I've heard have been heartbreaking, and I've really challenged my emotions, I'll say. I'm not going to go into any of those details because it's inappropriate to do that. What I've heard clearly from individuals who have trusted me is that they, at one point, trusted a process. They may have utilized the process. The process didn't fail them. Some people implementing the process had failed them. So that's why I thought it was important to have a third party come in and look at the situation. And I think it's worthwhile to look at policies also, but when the victims of abuse are saying the policy didn't necessarily fail me, people failed me, that is a huge problem that we as an organization need to deal with, and we need to deal with it on the micro level. When I've heard from these people, I've carried out my duty by walking them to the process, but when they tell me that they don't trust it, I don't know how else to help them apart from pointing out where the actual issues are. So at any point in time, I'd like to sit down with Mr. Hayward and Human Resources Management to talk about the issues that I have heard without breaking confidence with anybody else. I look forward to the conversation here, and I know that everyone on council is committed to creating a better environment for staff here. And I think there's been a lot of people in a lot of vulnerable positions that have just been let down in a way that we can never apologize enough for. So we need to find a resolution to this. We need to work hard. And I think that it's also important to note that the communications that I received are not isolated to one service area. They're across the corporation. Thank you.
Other speakers? I got Councillor Ridley and then Councillor Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak at your committee. I was and remain interested to hear from the committee members themselves. I know two of them co-signed a letter with me, and I was very grateful for that. In the past week and a bit, I also want to acknowledge some of the actions that I've seen from civic administration in terms of, getting ahead of this issue and making sure that this is something that you're jointly committed to addressing. I've seen that with some of the cooperative work between civic administration and the bargaining units, and your willingness to move ahead. Like Councillor Park, I think it's been made abundantly clear that there's an issue through, not only the City of London and the corporation and certain departments. I think we're seeing it across different cross-sects of society right now, and I think it's very important that we create that space that people can come forward and tell their stories, because someone's experience is their reality, and that it creates kind of everything for them. It impacts their home, it impacts their work, it impacts their drive to work. And so I think what I've heard from civic administration and so far from council is a real commitment to creating a safe workplace for everybody. And so I'm glad that we're moving ahead in that direction, and I would like to solidify it with a recommended motion that I and the co-signatories put on this letter that really commits to ensuring that we're creating that safe space. Like Councillor Park indicates, that we're bringing that third party to make sure that there's a path that people are comfortable bringing forward their concerns. And that we're making sure that our policy is the most up-to-date policy with input from the right parties. And that includes the representatives of our workers through their bargaining units, as well as third-party organizations in the community that have experience working in this area. So I look forward to support from the committee. I'm happy to answer any questions about any of my motivations or anything specific that myself and my colleagues have requested by this letter. But I think that this is a positive step in moving forward. So I hope the committee will support the recommended motion.
Councillor Morgan next.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to both my colleagues who spoke before who worked on letters. I know there was a number of councillors who I think started thinking about starting to craft letters, and I'm glad that a number of colleagues took the opportunity to follow through on that and put something in writing that the committee can consider. I want to start by commending our city manager, Mr. Hayward, who, despite very challenging circumstances over the past couple of weeks on a number of different issues, has made himself very available, particularly in the media. And I've heard him do a number of interviews on this particular subject, and I think that is an excellent approach to being an administrative leader in our city, to make yourself available, to be asked tough questions, and to answer those questions thoughtfully, and to proceed on this. So I wanted to recognize that publicly, because I think that's very important and a very true to the type of leadership that Mr. Hayward brings to this organization, and why I have confidence in him executing the will of council on looking into this and seeing through what positive changes we can make for our employees. With that being said, in the letters, and I appreciate that the chair has decided to deal with them in a combination way, and having not drafted either one of these, I read both of them and considered both of them equally, and I think that there's definitely some overlap to this, and I think adding in some specific language, I'll look at the letter that Councillor Ridley spoke about, adding some specific language into A and C around third-party support might be a way to combine to combine both intents. I know Councillor Ridley just spoke to, that is something that they've talked about, so maybe we want to actually put that into the motion, that as a review is undertaken, that it is supported by the third party, and as we look to develop alternative processes for people who aren't comfortable with whatever process exists or is developed, that we seek third party support for the development of that process, or even in some cases the execution of that process, if that's what it ends up being through the review. I will say C is a pretty important one for me, because like Councillor Ridley said, what people are comfortable with isn't necessarily what's in our policy, it's what they experience, whether that's current or past, and can only be defined by them. And so having a mechanism at some point in our process for those individuals who don't feel comfortable with it, particularly on workplace discrimination and harassment, I think is a pretty key component of what's being suggested that we start to move into today. And I appreciate that there are components in existing policies that get to that in some circumstances, but the way that we define that more clearly and then communicate that and make that available is probably pretty important to the process. So those are my thoughts on the two letters, and I think where they overlap, and I appreciate and will listen to my colleagues on committee's thoughts on it as well.
Mayor Brown next.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think it's very clear that we see individuals from all sectors coming forward with stories of harassment in unprecedented volumes. We need to take action. I'm pleased today at committee to see two letters come before us. I think we can find some convergence here. There's no doubt in my mind. I certainly also appreciate the efforts that Mr. Hayward has taken over the past many days as he's addressed this issue as the city manager. I think what we need to do is make sure that our policies and our practices and our people are all focused on protecting everyone. And I think that the answer is somewhere within these two motions. And I agree with Councillor Morgan that Part C of the letter that Councillor Ridley, Councillor Helmer and I crafted is very important, that employees have another option outside of the formal process if they feel that they need one. But I also feel that Part B is extremely important as well. And this is working together with our collective bargaining units. It's working together with our community partners, with stakeholders who have more experience in this area than we have, working with women who have experienced harassment and abuse and gender-based violence. And then finally, I think that it's really important that we do a review. What I'd like to ask through you, Mr. Chair, is a question to Mr. Hayward about what he's done up to this point, and also how he sees putting this motion that we're crafting on the floor right now into practice.
Mr. Hayward.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, this has been a difficult issue, obviously, to bring forward. One of the things that I will say is that we have had a lot of support for the direction that we're heading in, and it actually follows along the lines of the resolution that Councillor Ridley brought forward last week. We started to look at third parties that we might be able to bring in to help lead us through this process, and we know we need a group that is very, very good at dealing with these kinds of issues, because we want to make this as robust as possible. What I will say also, in his tenure in the role of Director of HR, Mr. Coxhead has also been looking at the policy and has already identified a number of areas that have been re-identified through this process that would need change. So we have not been sitting idly by waiting for something to happen. We have been looking at this, and we're going to bring it forward. But this will put it into a more comprehensive, more robust process, and I think that's a good thing. We are well along the way to identifying that third party. We're not there yet, but we are well along the way, and we will hopefully within the next couple of weeks be able to bring some things forward that you will be aware of. These are the process that we've outlined is not unique to the City of London. There are other organizations that are going through this, and again, we've been doing a lot of research on this over the last little while to see what the experiences of other organizations are, and they are actually quite consistent with where we're heading. In terms of the working with unions and associations, reached out to the majority of them, and they're all on side with where we need to go. There are a couple I'm still needing to talk to. But we're certainly seeing their support, and they want to be part of the solution as well, which is also encouraging. In terms of the steps that we want to take, there have been a number of issues that have been identified. We've only actually received 7, I believe, of that number that were identified in the community. I hear there are a number of other that have come forward to individuals around this horseshoe. We are not aware of what they are saying. And there have been 5 or 6 that have reached out to me personally. We want to address those specific issues. So again, we're looking at having a third party look at those issues through an investigation process, independent, so that people can feel safe that it's being dealt with appropriately, independent of the rest of this organization. And I think that's perhaps one of the only ways we can ensure that it will be felt safe, that people will feel safe in the process and that they've been dealt with appropriately. Twofold, we're moving forward on that third-party investigation piece to deal with the concerns that have come forward, and then we want to deal with the policy side of it and the process side of it. Some of the items we've identified, but we want to use the expertise of this third party to actually go through and help us with the scoping, and we can work with unions and bargaining agents and all employees, actually, as I said in the letter, because if people have ideas or concerns, that's something that we want to hear as well. But again, we'll address that in the future with council. I'm not sure if Mr. Coxhead wants to add anything to that, but that's sort of the lay of the land at this point.
Mr. Coxhead?
Thank you. The only thing I would like to add is that over the last week, we've been looking hard around the country with respect to how other organizations that are dealing with this particular concern, the commitment that folks have and the best methodologies to deal with it. So what we're trying to do is learn from what people have done in the past. So they've identified pitfalls that they had in their processes around communications and inclusion, for example, of unions. So we want to make sure that we don't fall into those pitfalls as well. And so it's going to take a little while to get it right. And I think to have a process that people have confidence in. And so that's what we're working to. It was a difficult week last week, March break, and to get experts to assist, but we're on it this week. We have some choices to make down the road, and we're clearly looking at all the options to get the best advice, the best practices, the best way for people to feel safe, to honor our commitment to create a healthy and safe workplace for all our employees.
I have Councillor Van Holst next.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I think anyone who spent 5 minutes with Mr. Haywood or Mr. Coxhead will know that the city, in the person of our city manager and our head of HR, is committed to an environment that's free from harassment. In this issue moving forward, I think I was thinking about the parable of the computer where it's jammed and someone suggests you reboot it, and someone suggests you take it to IT to get it fixed, and someone suggests you buy a new computer. And of course, trying to reboot it first, and then taking it to get fixed, and then finally replacing it is probably the steps to take. So in this, I think I would like to first have staff work their way through the process. I'm pretty confident that they'll be able to make this one work with a new city manager, new head of HR. We've got new representatives all around. As Councillor Park pointed out, it's often the people, and I think we've got very good people on this now. After that, then I think looking at the policy, or making big changes to the policy is where to go, and then finally, bringing in someone to try and change the culture entirely. So, those are the steps that I would like to take in some order. So although I see that we've got some great possibilities here, I'm also happy to have our staff move in the direction that they're going right now, and encourage everyone to have some faith in this. If it doesn't work out to people's satisfaction, then we can adjust the process or bring in more assistance as is needed. But I think we're all committed to having something that will work here in the City of London.
Councillor Zafman and then Deputy Mayor Hubert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a tough and sensitive issue to deal with, and frankly, I'm really glad that a number of my colleagues have brought something forward for us to try and address this in a way that is comprehensive. But this is a tough place to start, but frankly, we all own this and wear this because this is happening under our watch. And we need to do everything that we can to try and make this better, because as the City of London, as the corporation which really represents our entire city, this is not a good image for the city. It's not a problem of image, but frankly, how we're treating our employees, and they need to be treated better. No one should be afraid to utilize the policies that are in place. No one should be bullied or feel fearful for retribution. That's not something that we want for our employees here. And, frankly, we have, in the councillor's office, we're quite lucky to have some incredible staff and incredible students that come through our office who I actually had help in bringing some information for me on this subject specifically. And it was quite illuminating for me that if we go back to a Board of Control report from May 2003, where the city manager at the time, who had a report from Catherine Burr, who many of us may have heard of at this point, who was a human resource specialist who was brought in to draft a report on harassment and prevention policy and other issues. And I was also lucky to have Catherine as one of my professors when I was doing my master's at Western, so which is great. But one specific quote that I wanted to grab from that Board of Control meeting was that regarding the recommendation from Ms. Burr was that there are several sections of the human rights specialist draft policies detailing the roles and responsibilities of the parties and the steps involved in the investigation process that, in our view, are more properly the subject matter of a training package than a harassment slash discrimination policy. And there were changes made in terms of what was presented to the board and council at the time, the things taken out of that report that were not brought forward. And that's a huge red flag for me. That's a significant problem, and that's dating back to 2003. There are a number of other issues that came as a result of that. But frankly, that's 15 years at this point that this has been happening. So this is nothing new and clearly a problem that has been festering. And I'm glad that we have some new staff at the head of the organization that I know are very willing to take this on and do everything they can to make these changes. One thing that I wanted to ask, some deficiencies, I guess, that just from some research that our staff did were on the city's website, there are some documents which are missing and would be quite useful. I just want to put this through our chair to staff that maybe this can be done in a timely fashion. Specifically though, the health and safety page, the city manager's culture and municipal policies page, and the culture prosperity plan have not been populated. The pages exist, but they contain no content. So I was wondering, I assume maybe it's just something that was not done, not necessarily on purpose, but just something that needs to be filled. I want to just flag that for our administration, make sure that they're aware of that.
We'll follow up.
To the chair, thank you. And then I wanted to speak to, I guess 5.2, we're all sort of in the same subject now, but, specifically, it sounds like from stories that I've heard, stories that other colleagues have heard, stories that our management have heard, of stories where people were bullied and made to feel afraid to be able to come forward with significant concerns that may be affecting them on a very significant level. And I'm curious what exactly, and I appreciate that a third party is probably one of our only solutions at this point to help with this because of people's concerns with unfortunately, the system that we have in place or some of the people that are in place. What exactly are we looking at in terms of a third-party review? And would an investigation, would that look to uncover or bring to council's attention issues where we know issues have not been dealt with properly and people need to be disciplined for those things? Would that be something along the lines of what this third party would look at?
Certainly, if we go into detail on that kind of stuff, I think sometimes we may have to go in camera, but setting the scope of what we would do to learn from the past and what's gone on may obviously direct where we go in the future. I can tell you right now, one of the big areas that we'll be looking at is even this horseshoe. We will be looking at the horseshoe. We will be looking at cyberbullying. We'll be looking at threats through emails. We are going to broaden this out because every employee in this city needs to be protected. And sometimes the people on this side do not feel protected either. So that's something you need to be aware of as well. Everybody and every councillor needs to feel protected as well. So we really need to expand this out. And so I hear what everybody's saying, but if we want to get really into it, we're going to get into it. And we need to protect everybody because what has happened in the past is not right. Every employee needs to feel safe. Every staff member needs to feel safe, and every councillor needs to feel safe. That's where I'll leave it.
Through the chair, to our city manager, thank you for saying that. I think this is something where I think collectively we're all in this together and trying to make this a much better situation for everybody involved. And just one last final point. Another issue which Ms. Burr brought up was, I guess, at least within our policies at the time that there was reviewed and still not today, we don't have a definition for bullying. So just something that we might want to keep in mind as this we go forward with this.
Deputy Mayor Hubert.
Thank you. This has been a good conversation. I just have to say that a couple words come to mind with respect to this situation over the last week. One word is sad. I think many of us have felt profoundly sad as we've heard stories, as we've reflected on the situation. There's a heaviness that comes with those sorts of situations, and I think that's for staff. I think many of them have invested much of their time, and this sort of has put a spirit of sadness over the organization. The second word that comes to mind is serious, and I think it's really important that the community understands that while unfortunately as an employer and as a corporation, there's times when we can't say a lot, but it's important that the community understands that we're taking this very, very seriously, and it is not being dismissed. It's not being swept under the rug. It's being dealt with. So the three words that I think I appreciate, and I'm not sure, Mr. Chair, I've got two letters, and I don't know what the amalgamated motion will be, and I think it would be better if there were one motion that sort of takes the essence of the two letters and somehow blends them together. You know, we do have a lot of good stuff at the city, I Step Forward program and others that we've all participated. There's three things that I'm hearing from staff, Mr. Chair. One is, and I'm going to use the acronym ACT. One is attitude. I think Mr. Hayward has set the tone in terms of the attitude of the corporation towards the situation and towards how employees should feel at work. And quite frankly, we can change all the policies in the world. We can change all the structures in the world. But if we do not have the right attitude, we will not see the change that we want to see. The second thing is, and Mr. Cox had used the word, is commitment. That our senior leadership team is being committed to making the change. And Mr. Cox had said the third thing. He didn't use the word that I'm going to use. It will take time was the phrase that Mr. Cox had said. But by saying that now, he takes it away from us looking for some sort of silver bullet fast fix that will kind of get it off of our plate and move it along. It won't be that kind of thing because cultural change, structural change takes time to happen. And so the T in my word act is tenacious. And I hear that from our administration, that they're gonna go after, as Mr. Hayward just said, blow it up and get to the root of it. And maybe, you know, we haven't all been aware of what's going on and we can, you know, raise our hands with that, but now we are aware. And now it sits on our plate to act, and we're responsible to see those things coming forward. So I'm encouraged, Mr. Chair, by what I'm hearing today. I think it's important that the community knows that from the moment this story broke, this has been taken seriously, and that both administration and elected officials have been committed to moving forward and getting to the root of it. And I think we've all done a good job on that, although it's been a difficult week. So those are my comments, Mr. Chair. I look forward to the blended motion, if I could call it that, coming up on our screen.
I have Councillor Ridley. Go ahead.
Thank you. And I just wanted to say, you know, I'm really glad that this is moving forward. I expect that the committee is working on a blended motion based on the comments. I'm really glad that the civic administration are working towards a better policy and a process. I respect that that is going to take some time. I know that you'll be able to move forward as soon as you have the right people in place. But I'm wondering, what is the message for somebody for tomorrow or for Friday or for next Monday? Have we, as of right now, we have an existing policy in place, but if you have people who are feeling uncomfortable, what's the message to them when they call me or call one of my colleagues to say, I want to report something, but I don't feel comfortable?
So through you, the message that I've been pushing out to this point is basically that we are trying to get a third party in place to make the process as safe as possible for people to come in. Now, yes, that is under the existing policy, but I think Councillor Park indicated it's not necessarily the policy that failed them, it's the people administering the policy that failed them. I think that's the statement that I heard. So taking it out of sort of the City of London organisation piece and giving it with a third party who is expert in the area, I think will help, and we're hoping to have that in place fairly soon. So I'll let Bill speak to it.
So, through the chair, so our intention is to do this in two phases. One is to create a safe place as quickly as possible for people to tell their stories. And that'll be the important part, so they can get their story out and get it into a private, to get them to be able to tell their story in that independent third party way, right, in whatever form they want to do it. So that's, we're trying to wrap that piece around. The other policy review and procedural aspects and what's being suggested along the idea of an audit or assessment, that's what's going to take some time to deal with. So we're going to try and do these parallel, get up a meaningful place for people to tell their stories to the external third party, and start to work through those once we get an idea how big and wide that is, and then as soon as possible is start to engage in this assessment / audit process that is yet to be scoped as to the most appropriate way to deal with. So that's our message right now, is that if you have a story to tell and you're uncomfortable telling it within the existing process, there will be one coming. And as Martin has suggested, that, you know, we've already told them folks across the corporation that an independent third party will be engaged to help with this process. So if that helps in the...
Councillor Usher next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really appreciate this conversation. I think that it's going in the right direction. I have a quotation, and I'm following up on what Councillor Hubert said, that you sow a thought and you reap an act. You sow an act and you reap a character. You sow a character and you reap a destiny. And I think that's what we're steering towards from what I hear in this conversation. I often thought about this, and I think about this in terms of diversity and inclusivity and all those things. Sometimes we need to really find out where the problem is and what the problem is and where it lies and how we can fix it. Because unless you know those things and who are involved, we will have a hard time. So I think a third party will be in a better position to do that. But I also want to say, and this is something I picked up from what Mr. Hayward was saying, the people who are involved are really the employees and our customers. And we as a council can't take ourselves out of this because we're involved too. We're part of this. We may be part of the problem and we need to be part of the solution. So I think that is very important. But I think that sometimes we need to be able to want to hear something. I listened to Councillor Zafman, and I remember very well Catherine Burke. And I never knew what her report was. I knew she came with her report, and then I knew she left. And I use the word left very casually, because I don't know whether she left or she was driven out. But I never heard her report, and I heard a lot of things about that era that was going on that I wish I knew. I knew why she was brought in, but I didn't know why she left. And many of the things that I heard, I'm not going to repeat here, but I'd have liked to know, because I think that some of the answers may be what she found at that point in time. So I just want to be sure that we find the answers and find the solutions, but not on a one-shot basis. It has to be continuous, and it has to be continuous looked upon. So the idea of looking at it at every council term, that might be it. It may be. I asked a question once: if we look at our policy on a regular basis, and if we bring it up to speed, and I know that we do, but it might be very, very small items. This might be one of the big changes that we have to make, you know. So I really appreciate the conversation as it's going and the direction that we're heading. I think that that staff has this well in their head, and I think whatever motion we come out of this meeting, I think will be very, very good for the scenario and for the process that we're heading towards. Thank you.
Just look to see if there's other speakers. Councillor Zafman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just another question again through you to, I guess maybe our staff. So specifically around the third party, which just sticks in my head a bit. It's I guess the difficult aspect for me is what is the end result of that third party, and does it come back? I think the fear that I think many people have is, well, yes, a third party is good. Where do those results end up? Because maybe they end up in the place where people were concerned with in the first place. And that's not to say anything about any individuals here, but simply just the concerns that I know exist. And frankly, if there was a third party investigation that included council, I'm not sure if it would be best for council to then be looking at that and deciding on anything that comes from that. So I'm not sure if anybody has thought that far into this process yet, but I'd be curious to hear if there are any insights.
So through the chair, with respect to the policy elements, obviously that will be something that will come back and discuss through council. With respect to some of the process changes, we may end up doing that to the extent that it doesn't identify specific individuals and that type of thing. When it comes to individual investigations, you are bound by privacy rules. So that likely will not come back to council at this point based on the existing policy. Assuming the investigation is done under the existing policy, it may take some time and then may be redone under the new policy. But as Mr. Cox had said, this is going to take some time. In terms of once the documentation is there through an investigation established by a third party, obviously that third party may be in a position also to help recommend, but we also then have to apply local rules and collective agreement rules and those types of things. So it's a lot more complex when you get down to specific investigations.
Sorry, Mr. Cox, go ahead.
There's only one thing I'd like to add to that. As it relates to the audit and my research in the last few days and week, is that open and transparency with respect to the results is important to the employees, right? So that we don't come and ask them all sorts of questions and not tell them what the answers were. So we'll be taking that into careful consideration as to how we communicate back in whatever assessment as to what our findings are, good, bad, or indifferent.
Go ahead.
Through the chair to Mr. Hayward and Mr. Cox, thank you for that. And I think specifically on that transparency piece, I think that's really key, because from stories and things that I have heard from individuals is that there's a concern of things that had gotten swept under the rug or maybe not dealt with as they should have been. And so making sure that that's thorough and that all of that comes out, I think is a really crucial piece. So thank you for identifying that.
I have Councillor Slee, thanks for joining us. And then I think I saw Councillor Usher again. No? Okay, Councillor Slee, go ahead.
Thank you for recognizing me, and thank the committee for allowing me to speak on this important conversation. I think, I'm glad we're heading in a direction where it seems like immediate action is happening, and it seems as if grassroots and community has been heard. I hope the committee, when we get to council, because I made a commitment to continue to hear from members of the public, and in the interim, if there was any suggestions that came forward based on what is shaped out of this, I may bring something forward at council. I'm not sure what that may or may not look like, but I just wanted to make sure that when we get to council that I don't hear committee work as an excuse or a barrier when we get to that point, because of course, this is gonna be something that's gonna be formulated today, and then the community will have some time to digest, and there might be some feedback that comes in the interim. I don't know if that may be the case or not. The other thing I wanted to ask through staff, to the chair, to staff is, as we're doing this great, work and what comes out of here might be very positive. I wonder, I know some of our boards and commissions have kind of their own policies in place and stuff, but could we then start to have a conversation or to share what the work we're doing here and kind of, give them the opportunity to kind of take what we're doing so they don't have to, of course, go through that same process. I know each board and commission may be different and have different kind of challenges, but I just figured that since we're doing this, is that a possibility for us to maybe, for example, share with the health unit or police board or wherever it may be?
Mr. Hayward.
Through the chair, we always share information back and forth, so that would certainly be an area we could share, yes.
And I just wondered, I'm not sure if that would require crafting in the motion. I'll leave that with committee because I can't do anything now, but I just wonder if that's something that, just to make sure that that does happen. I'm sure staff will do that, but just because this might be something that comes down the road, but I just think it might benefit with some of these larger organizations that are part of the city, but separate from the city. And since we're kind of leading on this work, and so I'll leave that with committee and see if any of my colleagues say something about that. And I guess my last part is that I want to continue to say, to every employee in the city and every person in our city to continue to do what they can to support those who need help, and to make sure when we see something to say something, and to not be bystanders, and to continue to be leaders, and to ensure that we have a safe workforce for every single person. And I stand with all those people, and I thank those people for their strength and courage.
Okay, that's taken us to the end of the speakers list. We have had pretty good discussion about these two different letters that have different directions in them. What I've heard in the discussion so far is support for all of the different directions that have been suggested. So what I think we should do is just combine these things into one motion, get that up on the screen, people can review it, and then if there's any adjustments that need to be made, we can talk about those specific adjustments. I think at this point, though, we need to see it all together. There's sort of, if we essentially add on the parts that came from Councillor Park's letter to the other suggested motion, I think we'd have one comprehensive motion that's covering off all those things. They don't seem to be in conflict with each other. And it seems like our staff, frankly, are already moving in this direction. And in some ways, we're kind of catching up to what they're already doing. So is there a mover for that? And I'll get it up on the screen. Mayor Brown, seconder. Councillor Morgan, great. And then once we have it on the screen, let's take a look and we'll get into discussion.
Chair, if I could, I wanted to add a G.
Well, let's get on the screen so we know what the letters are. I think G's already gonna be on there, but you want to add something else? Okay. Is that what you want? Okay, so it's up on the screen here. You'll notice there's the parts that came from the one letter. There's a part E, which is the part from Councillor Park's letter. There's a part F, which is about reporting back. And we got a sense of that there's going to be work underway. There's a date in there, which I think the clerk has suggested, June 2018. So see what the staff think about that in terms of a timeline to report back. And then there's the part G, which is about the mayor seeking consent, which also came from Councillor Park's letter. So it would be an H, I guess, if you're looking to add something.
I would like to formalize Councillor Salih's suggestion to share this process with all of our boards and commissions.
Okay, I think the clerk's heard that, and we'll just get that going. Councillor Morgan?
Yes, this is structurally fine, I think. I know that there are pieces in there that we talked about that aren't necessarily directly in some of the components about the work that civic administration is already engaged in, and that is engaging a third party. I see it's been worked into a couple of them. I wonder, given the work that you've done through the chair, is there any authorizations or directions or motions that civic administration requires of council to proceed in some of the directions that they're already proceeding in? In other words, I'm happy for us to craft out and piece together a motion, but I'm also looking to see, is there components that we need to add to support some of the work that is already being contemplated by civic administration?
I think maybe a general authorization for civic administration to undertake all necessary acts to put in place a third party would be appropriate. I think the other elements are maybe we could take it back and bring back some suggestions for council. I recognize that's not ideal, but I need to discuss this with my colleagues and just make sure we got it otherwise.
Yeah, I think that's good, and I'm thinking from all administrative acts is probably a good thing to have in there. It allows you to exercise some budget discretion. I know a third party isn't free, and we should probably recognize that at some point. I think we're all supportive of that, but giving you some authorization to do that. I'm also very comfortable, as Councillor Salih said, that I anticipate we'll have a discussion about this at council, and so having some time to bring back some modifications to this, whether it's driven by the community or civic administration or colleagues who aren't here today, I think we're all pretty committed, at least I am, to being flexible at council on having some adjustment to this at that point too.
Councillor Zafin.
Through you, Mr. Chair, specifically on E, carrying out a third-party investigation, the service area specifically identified. That's certainly, I think, useful, but given the circumstances and that we may not know of all the issues within the organization, would it not be better to be organization-wide rather than specific service areas? And I'm wondering if that would change any timelines or be amenable with our staff, if that's something that they could undertake.
So first, I think what I'd like to do is check with Mr. Hayward to see if he thinks this language is restrictive in the sense that it's saying you can only investigate in certain service areas, or whether it's just being, pointing, saying, make sure you do these ones, but it doesn't stop me from doing anything else. Go ahead. So through the chair, thank you. It is a little restrictive in that I think we do want to look at citywide, given that the number of folks that have said it's broader than just one or two areas. So we do want to address it citywide. We do want to look at it from the perspective of how the policy and the process is applied, but maybe even diving in, we might identify other things through the process and through our engagement of the third party that would identify things that none of us have thought of that we need to address. We do have a rigor around training on, appropriate behavior in the workplace, culture, and certainly discrimination prevention. So those are already established, but there may need to be special areas that we need to focus on. So I'd rather not just pinpoint us to certain areas. The other thing is the specific complaints. And again, I emphasize, because I have not seen all the complaints. I have received, I think, 7, and I think council members were forwarded many of those same complaints directly from the Abused Women's Centre.
we need to investigate every single one of those complaints. And so there needs to be due process that takes place so that we can get to the bottom of what they are. Because there's multiple people involved when you have a complaint, and there's multiple issues that need to be addressed. And believe it or not, there's lots of different aspects of law that get applied to it, not just collective agreements, but labor law, human rights law. There's all kinds of things that come to play. So they're extremely complex pieces, and the processes should be designed for the protection of all involved, and then the appropriate dealing of resolution at the end of it. So, but those will be specific to cases that have been identified that we can then take forward through the third party with an investigation. So they may be specific areas.
Okay, I'm just going to go and see if Councillor Park wants to weigh in. I know this is language that came out of her letter. It seems like there's a slight disagreement. Councillor Zafman, go ahead.
Through Mr. Chair, just a suggestion on wording, if that's possible, and maybe that Councillor Park can respond after that. Just at the end of it, at the end of E, after end of use, and all other City of London service areas.
I'm sorry, Councillor, could you say that again?
Through the chair. So Frank, just my concern is that while this is looking, the E is looking at specific service areas that were identified, there are a number of service areas which are not, so just to make it inclusive of everything.
That's great.
Disagreement resolved, great. I have Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you. Just on that point, it does seem that what it's asking for is that those specific ones be looked at immediately. It doesn't say that you can't look at all the other ones. So I think that immediacy can certainly be, it looks like we are doing that. We've started that already. So the immediacy is happening there, but I think it's still a valid request. There's the point.
So we're just going to get that revised language up. You'll note that there's an I. Civic administration be authorized to undertake all necessary actions to complete the above noted review and process improvements. So we'll take a look at that language. If there's adjustments that need to be made between now and council, we circulate an amendment sheet. Councillor Van Holst.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I do think perhaps a different order would be appropriate, but that seems like something that could be left to staff to adjust as well.
Just getting the language adjusted. And at that point, we're going to need a mover. I think the mayor moved the original one. Councillor Morgan was the seconder. Great. Okay, you'll see that E has been revised. It has, as well as all other areas throughout the corporation. Let's get that moved and seconded. We'll look for any final discussion. Mayor Brown. Thank you. Councillor Zafman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just a final comment for myself. That's all, just from you to through you to our staff. you know, this is probably, I imagine, maybe one of the most challenging things that we as an organization may have to deal with. And I'm very appreciative that our senior leadership here are not, there's no defensive position. This is taking it on and doing what we need to do to get this done. And I think that's really important. I'm glad to see that today. So thank you.
Okay, I don't see any other discussion. Let's open the vote if we can.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Thank you, colleagues, members of the committee, and guests for being here. That was a good discussion on a difficult and important topic. I think we made good progress. I see Councillor Usher flagging for some additional business. I have a feeling I know what it is. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Generally, I would make this comment at City Council, but because we don't have City Council until next week, Tuesday, I'm going around to each of the committees and ask them for permission to make this comment. So what I want to do is to just bring to your attention as a committee and staff and the public that tomorrow, March the 21st, is the United Nations Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. And this council and this city has always taken an active role in doing that. For example, one of the things that will be happening, thanks to the mayor and the city clerk, is that most of the city buildings plus London Life will be littered red throughout the day and tomorrow night for the occasion. And I just wanted to bring that to your attention. There will be other activities throughout the day. For example, there is something happening at the Hellenic Center, which the mayor and I are invited to, and several other things, but I wanted to bring it to your attention. The other thing I want to just identify, and this is more personal, is because tomorrow is also Down Syndrome Day. There may be lots of other days. I just know about these two, Down Syndrome Day. I happen to have a granddaughter who has Down syndrome, and I just wanted to bring it to the attention of the public that this is something that we should be aware of. And people with Down syndrome, they're very loving, they're very kind, they're very huggy. So that's it. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you. I don't see any other additional business. Oh, yes, I do. Go ahead.
I just wanted to wish Councillor Park a happy birthday today. Today's her birthday.
Happy birthday, Councillor Park. Okay. Councillor Zaveman? Adjournment. Seconder for that? Councillor Van Holst. All those in favor? We're adjourned. Thank you very much.